you guys for coming on for another episode of Howling with the Wolfe. We're going to do something a little different this week for all of you guys who come on to listen to my sports and NFL talk. We're going to put that on delay for just 1 week and talk a little bit of sports journalism. I get questions all the time from people about my job, about the business, about really a lot of different things that kind of concern younger folks in this day and age. And I always try to do these sort of episodes, usually around the bye week. This is my third season of Howling with the Wolfe, and this is the third time I'm going to do it. But essentially, this is kind of my platform to you to kind of answer everybody's questions that you have about sports journalism, that you have about my career, and maybe how I can help you guys if some of you guys are aspiring journalists. So first things first, to kick this off, there was news that came out today about Sports Illustrated that they're laying off reportedly half of their staff. Wanted to give all my prayers and thoughts to the people on the staff. I know several of the journalists and editors, and they do really good work. I know for me personally, I grew up reading Sports Illustrated, reading local newspapers. So to see some of the effect of journalism these days and seeing some people lose their job is never fun. So I see you there, John Hill from Turks and Caicos. I wish I was like you. I'm out here in Miami. It's a nice day, but it's not Turks and Caicos nice. But yeah, so I just want to give my thoughts and prayers for them. I used to work in a newspaper setting, so I know how buyouts go and how there's like these hedge fund managers who kind of take over and really kind of make decisions for companies, even if they're making money. So it sucks to kind of hear all that, and that's kind of the ugly side of journalism that a lot of people don't see when the stories come out. So I can talk a little bit about that if you guys want to hear, but first things first for me, I just kind of want to discuss my journey. I want to give you guys a little insight of what my role is on a daily basis and kind of let you guys into my block. So as always, I've got people out here on the Facebook Live channel, and I've got people out here on my Periscope Twitter account. So if you guys have any questions, as always, fire away on the chats, and I'll shut up for a second and answer whatever you guys want to know. So I think for me, for those of you guys who follow me, I've moved to, this will be my third spot that I've been over the last 3 years. So I began my sports journalism career in Denver. I graduated from the University of Houston, go Cougs, and I covered the Denver Broncos for a little over 2 years. They won the Super Bowl my first year there. Peyton Manning was wrecking things out there, and after that, I got hired by ESPN, and I got moved to Nashville, and I covered the Tennessee Titans. And I see Logan Gillespie is a Titans fan. He says, "Tell him tighten up, not fins up." What's wrong with him there? I always have fans from different regions, So I love to talk about the Titans, the Broncos, the Dolphins, because each of those were important, portions of my journalism career. So after Nashville, I went along and went to Miami, and that's where I am now. So essentially, I have two parts of my role. I write for ESPN.com, which is where you see a lot of my articles that I post on Twitter and Facebook, that you may see when you go on the ESPN site. And then the other part of it is I do TV. I'll have live TV hits on SportsCenter and NFL Live to talk about whatever they want me to talk about. So sometimes it'll be the Dolphins. Why are they tanking? What's Josh Rosen doing? All these different things. And then sometimes it'll be wild news stories. Like this summer, this spring, I did Robert Kraft in the Orchids of Asia spa, which was an eye-opening story to do about the prostitution deal out there. And then I did Conor McGregor when he got arrested out here in Miami for smashing a dude's phone outside of Live one night. And I did, Get Up and SportsCenter after that. And then I did the SportsCenter Kendrick Norton story that I talked about on last week's Howling with the Wolfe. That was a SportsCenter feature I did. So it's a two-part role, and I really enjoy it, because I can write, I can do TV, both things that I enjoy, and I can write for a national perspective. So I don't write every day, but I probably write about 3 or 4 times a week, and it's sort of a chance for me to kind of share, to the national audience what I see about Miami Dolphins, sometimes Miami Heat. I wrote about Jimmy Butler last week, and kind of share that perspective. So that's a little bit about my role. I see some of you guys' comments coming in, talking about SI. You guys didn't see that. Oops, flip that around. See you up there. Thank you. No, appreciate you guys all for watching. Like I said, this is a platform for me to kind of be casual with you guys. You see, I'm out here in my balcony on a t-shirt, trying to tell you guys about my journey. So that's a little bit of what I do now, and I wanted to tell you guys that. And for those of you who are journalists, one thing I'd say off the jump is that I wouldn't get discouraged by some of the stuff that's coming out, about the industry, about Sports Illustrated, and all. Where the direction is there. It's not ideal. It sucks to see it. I hate to see it. But I always tell people when they ask, get into journalism. If it's something that you're really passionate about, if it's something that you believe that you can do. I was just a little kid from Mississippi who liked to talk about sports, who figured, hey, if I can get on the TV or if I can get right sometime, then that'd be dope. And it's really worked out. I've been blessed enough to kind of be in this platform. So that's kind of where I am at this point. And I think for a lot of young people who are trying to get in the industry, one thing I would definitely say is creativity is king. We have got beyond the days of you have to be somewhere for 20 years to get a particular role. Back when I was in high school, the thought was you have to be a newspaper writer for 20 years before you get the big role, or you got to do this for this long. And now it's really, they're accepting people, they're accepting personalities, and they're accepting a lot of creativity. One of my good friends, Master Tefson, just is releasing a show called Untold Stories. And if you guys haven't seen it, check it out. It's a perfect example of like the creativity that this new generation is going to be able to have, being able to tell stories of these athletes in ways that maybe younger people can relate to. So that's one thing I would tell you guys: creativity. Don't be afraid to be yourself. And at this industry, it's enough room for me, you, whoever else, if you're willing to grind and put the work in on it. So that's kind of my opening soliloquy on there. If you guys have any individual questions, I'll take those on. If not, I can kind of take them throughout the episode. One thing I did want to kind of share with you guys is, people always see the glamour of TV and glamour of the job, and I kind of wanted to show you guys some of the, a couple instances of ebbs and flows that I had in my career, and to take you behind the curtain of how I kind of learned and how it always wasn't easy for me. I always tell this story. The first thing that comes to my mind is about the hours of this job, and my wife probably can attest to it. I love my job. I'll never complain about it. But sort of the unpredictability of it is always unique. I always remember the year after the Broncos won the Super Bowl. I was in Denver. They just won the Super Bowl. It was awesome, and essentially we were waiting on Peyton Manning's decision. He looked terrible that year on the field. He was dealing with a foot injury. He had 9 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. Brock Osweiler was there. There was a lot of stuff going on, and we knew that he was going to make a decision, and we were just trying to decide when. And they won the Super Bowl in February. He ultimately didn't make his decision until the second week of March, right before free agency. So there's a period between, second week of February after they won the Super Bowl and had their Super Bowl parade, and the second week of March where we were like in limbo. And, I really got into the Denver culture, so we, like to go skiing and hiking. And, all season, we wanted to do that stuff. My friends would hit me up, say, hey, can we do this? And I'd always have to tell them, I can't go too far. Peyton News is going to be around the corner. So essentially, you're in your own, cell, so to speak, in this off season because you never know what's going to happen. And the unpredictable happened kind of when I least expected it. I think it was a Sunday morning. I was going to go to church with my wife, and I think it was like 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m. I believe Chris Mortensen broke the news and said, hey, Peyton Manning's retiring. And I woke up and got a bunch of messages on my phone, and I had to rush to a coffee shop, and I essentially spent that whole day writing stories, calling people. I already had something pre-written. I think I ended up writing 2 more stories that day. So from maybe 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., that became a Peyton work day on a Sunday in early March. So that kind of is a little kind of a sign of how this job can potentially take you off to the side. Even this year, I mentioned earlier about the McGregor story. My family was in town that week. I think it was in March as well. And my dad and my mom, my little brother, they were in town and they wanted to see Miami. It's their first time out here in Miami. So they came out and I showed them South Beach. We're heading back to the house. I'm not sure if we just ate dinner or we're about to go eat dinner. But I got a call from one of my producers for TV side. And they were like, how quickly can you get to this jail in Miami? And, I live in Miami, so it's about 20 minutes from me. But this was like right before 9 o'clock, maybe 8:30, 8:45. And they were like, I need you on SportsCenter at 11 o'clock to talk about Conor McGregor and getting arrested. And I'm like, whoa. All right. First of all, I know nothing about this story. Second of all, I've got to shower. I've been outside of South Beach all the time. I've got to figure out, putting on clothes. I've got to catch up on the story. And I'm hungry. So all this stuff is happening. And I've got 2 hours to get on set and be prepared. So I did it. I rushed to the jail. I took a shower, put on a suit, and got there. And I did the hit. And I think it went well. But the joke about TV that people always say is they don't care about what's going on in your life outside of, you doing the hit. So everybody on TV just saw the hit. They didn't know that I was, rushing to the set or anything like that. They just know, what is Cam talking about? Does he know what he's talking about? Is he coherent or does he look like an idiot? And hopefully that day I didn't look like an idiot. But that's kind of like, some of my job, and I love it. So like I said, I'll never complain about it. It's better. I always say it's better than getting a real job. That's my thing that I say to all the people in our journalism room all the time, because, no matter if we're working till 11 p.m. at night, or if we have a random off day in the middle of the week because nothing's going on, it's the unpredictability that we love about this job. So those are kind of a couple of stories that I wanted to share with you guys about my job, my experience. One other thing I kind of wanted to jump on, and if you guys have any questions whatsoever, like I said, fire in, and I'll be happy to answer them. But one other thing I did want to share is, for young journalists and people who care about this industry, I always talk about my locker room interactions. And even on this show, I kind of have brought a little mini segment of inside the locker room. I guess for this week's, I'll tell a story that didn't go my way and kind of gave me an eye-opening experience about, the job and the culture. I was a really young journalist in Denver. And I told you guys I was in Denver covering the Denver Post. My ESPN Cup, going all on brand today, company man. I was in Denver at the Denver Post, and I think this was either my first year or my second year there. And I was, 22-year-old journalist. I thought I was, the man, but I still had things to learn. And one of the things I did have to learn is I developed a good relationship with some of the players. And, that the Denver team that year was really braggadocious, and their secondary had a lot of personalities, from Aqib Talib and Chris Harris and TJ Ward, Darian Stewart, a lot of really, really good players. So I believe it was one game right before they were about to play Pittsburgh, and this is the Antonio Brown, Martavius Bryant Pittsburgh Steelers, and it was a really big matchup. And I think that, the players, we were all in the locker room talking about something, and I went up to TJ Ward, and I was asking him essentially about the Pittsburgh Steelers receiving corps, because I think they were the number one offense in the league at that time. And, I was talking to him, and sometimes you have, conversations with players that are off the record where you're just kind of shooting the shoot, and you're just talking about, rappers or, basketball, whatever. So I asked him a question, and I essentially said, how are you guys going to stop, the Pittsburgh Steelers offense this week? They're number one in the league. And he goes off, and he's like, man, they're number one in the league because they haven't faced us yet, and, we're going to show them. And it goes off and gives a lot of, really good quotes. So I'm like, okay, take this down, go back into the media room, write up a story, talk about TJ Ward saying they ain't faced an opponent like us yet, and write the story up. It comes out next day. That whole day, Pittsburgh news stations are taking the clips from my article, talking about it on the radio station, talking about TJ Ward said they ain't faced nobody like the Broncos yet. So it's hyping up all this this janter on Pittsburgh radio a lot of trash. They're saying it's like bulletin board material. And the next day I get in the locker room, not that same day, but the next day after that, I get in the locker room and TJ Ward comes up to me and he's like, man, I didn't know that we were on the record with that story. Why you put that out there? Blah, blah, blah. You got all these Pittsburgh folks saying that I'm talking trash, all this different stuff. And I'm like, man, I thought we were on the record. Like, I clearly had, I had my recorder out. I was talking to you. I asked you a football question. I thought we were on the record. And he was like, nah, I didn't know, blah, blah, blah. So essentially, we ended up being okay. Like, we had a conversation about it. And he said what I said he said. But we just kind of had a misunderstanding about whether he thought this was something for me to print versus just him telling me something in general. So he was really upset that day. Like, he was yelling at me, and I was like, whoa, this is an eye-opening experience. So after that day, we were cool. We're still tight. I talk to him on a semi-regular basis now. He's out of the league. But that taught me a lesson like, hey, you got to be really clear on, some of these things when you're on the record, when you're off the record. Do you need these things? Because, you want to keep those relationships with players. You don't want to just come in and just get that quote at the risk of ruining a relationship. So that's something I learned really early on, and I think I still have a really good relationship with players. So sometimes if it's something that, it might not be clear or something that's on the boundary, I'll just say to a guy like, hey, you cool with me using this? Or if I usually have regular conversations with a player that's off the record, then I'll come and say, hey, you cool with me pulling my recorder out? And once I get the head nod, that's sort of that confirmation that we're on the record and I can use whatever in my articles or on TV or whatever. So that kind of experience, shaped me. So that, like, there's little things that you guys might not see, and that's kind of why I wanted to share with you guys that kind of, make or break a relationship. That's something that, if I didn't approach that correctly, or if I didn't come pull them aside and say, hey, man, I didn't make that clear enough. If I didn't, a lot of these people read this and we're young secondary, and you can't just, you can't just kill somebody's confidence like that while making that type of punt. And, I didn't realize that, like, I realized that they read a lot of that stuff, but I didn't realize that it was that, that type of stuff was going to hurt their feelings. So now I just be a little careful on how I say stuff. I still say if it's on my mind and give people, my perspective. But I'm a little bit more careful on how hard I go and, kind of what analogies I make because, players read this, especially young players, and, they're trying to figure out their way in the league. So you can't crush them with stuff. So that was another lesson I learned from there. So hopefully that, you guys got an insight into what my job is here. And, maybe those stories kind of gave you a little insight on there. So I have one question here that I want to answer from Josh on Air. He says, a fellow sports anchor here, how do you go about studying different sports and keeping up with the teams? That's a good question. I think for me, I love football, first and foremost. Favorite sport, always knew that I was going to cover football once I realized this was a dream. So I played football growing up. So for me, the X's and O's of things wasn't as hard for me as learning, some of the mechanics of TV or some of the mechanics of writing. So I watch football in my spare time. Like, as soon as I get off with y'all, I'm going to watch this Thursday night football game and be pumped into it. So I think, football came natural. The other sports I've watched for enjoyment, but I had to do different things to learn about them. So, like, I ask people. For me, like, I'm not shy. Like, I will ask basketball writers. Like, I just did a Jimmy Butler press conference last week, and I'm not around the Heat a lot. So I'm not going to be naive enough to think that I know everything about the Heat. So I developed relationships with different writers that cover different outlets, and I simply asked them, like, hey, how does Pat Riley react to this? Have you guys talked to Jimmy yet? What are these other players, body language like? What's their culture like? Because if I'm writing a story about another beat, I don't want to come in like just kind of a guy flying in and not really having an understanding of things. So for me, it's honestly asking questions about things I don't know about other sports. I covered, when I did the Conor McGregor trial, I asked one of our UFC writers for context on a UFC question that I had. I watch UFC as a fan casually, but I don't know enough about it to say, hey, I'm going to go and break down a Conor McGregor fight. So, like, those sort of things I ask about. And, if I don't know about it, I won't go into depth about it. I'm not going to look and just kind of BS my way through something. So, even on a football level, I've talked about this a little bit in, like, different radio shows or podcasts. But, 2 or 3 years ago when the social justice movement came about and players deciding to kneel and protest and use their voice to make change, I had to really learn a lot more about politics because I was a once every 4 year guy, never watched CNN, never did any of this stuff. So a lot of these guys talking about, the politics of things and making an impact in their particular area, I didn't know who the governor or the mayor was in a particular area. So I kind of had to educate myself on that. And like anything, you can't pretend that you know it all. And if you don't pretend that you know it all, then you're more relatable to somebody that you're trying to learn from or that you're trying to teach. So hopefully that answers your question there. I think it's a really good question because especially in this day and age, you're going to be asked to do more than just one sport. Like I work for ESPN. My job's a Dolphins reporter, but I can go out there to the Heat. Like I did some Jimmy Butler stuff. I did some Dwayne Wade stuff and Chris Bosh stuff last year. I'll probably do some University of Miami stuff if they ever become, good again. And I don't know about the Marlins, but we'll see. So yeah, you just got to be prepared and do those different things. So I had one question coming in from Wayne saying, "What do you think about the job Coach Flores has done so far?" Wasn't doing a lot of football today, but I'll answer this for you, and then I'll answer John Hill's question, and then we'll go ahead and get out of here. Coach Flores, I've said this before. I don't know if I've said it on here, but I think Brian Flores has the hardest job in the NFL this season. It's clear that the Dolphins, talent-wise, have very little to compete with a lot of these other NFL teams. They've been purposely sent into an extreme rebuild, and the goal was to be competitive in 2020 and beyond. This isn't the time to talk about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to go about the rebuild. But as far as Brian Flores, I will say that he has not made excuses. And, I know there's a lot of coaches. I've covered coaches in the NFL. I've watched other coaches, from across the league. And coaches love to make excuses. So I will say this about Brian Flores. He has not used that excuse card when I think he could have. He's gone through Jim Caldwell, having to take a step back because of his health issues. He's going through the Kenny Stills stuff. Some of it was self-inflicted with the Jay-Z stuff, but some of it wasn't self-inflicted with the, Stephen Ross stuff. You got a guy like Kendrick Norton, who I did the story on, who gets in a car accident on July 4th, and Brian Flores has to leave his Maryland farm where he's vacationing with family and go care for him. So, your job never stops. So, I think, he's done a really good job, or I'll say a solid job handling adversity. I don't think it's fair to judge him on his wins and losses yet until 2021, ideally 2021. I will say this, and I've said this before, I really hope the Dolphins give him time to see this through. I always have in the back of my mind the Steve Wilkes situation in Arizona, and to a lesser extent the Vance Joseph situation in Denver, where those coaches only got 1 or 2 years. And we talk about black coaches, particularly black defensive coaches. They don't get a lot of the chances that a lot of their counterparts get. So I really hope that Brian Flores gets a shot to really see this rebuild through. I think he's shown me a lot of chops that, he can do this thing. We just haven't really got a good chance to see how good of a coach he is because they haven't had the talent to compete, at least for 4 quarters. For half, they have, but not for 4 quarters. So hopefully that answers your question. Last one from John Hill, and then I'm going to wrap it up. As always, thank you guys for this. Next week, we're going to get back into the football talk. I just want to give you guys this taste of a sports journalism talk during the bye week. But John Hill says, what do you honestly think of tanking as a journalist, and what is it like trying to write about it? Very good question. As I said kind of in the beginning of this episode, I covered the Denver Broncos in 2015 when they won the Super Bowl. So I kind of joke with people that I thought all the teams I covered were going to win a Super Bowl. Boy, was I wrong. It's not like that. You get every spectrum. Like when I was in Tennessee, they made a playoff game, but they recorded sort of mediocre the whole time throughout the season. Then they made the playoff game. Then they won a playoff game. Then they fired their coach anyway. So, I got everything. I got a middle season that kind of had swings left and right. I had a season last year and with the Dolphins that was very mediocre, that started off really strong and then kind of hit the wave real down. And then they fired their coach. So, I'm the only thing I'm hoping for this year is that I get more than 1 year with a coach. Because I have not had more than 1 year with a coach in my NFL career. I don't know if that makes me a coach killer or whatnot, but I've not had more than one NFL season, with the head coach, my career. So actually, not lying. I think I had 2 years of Gary Kubiak. But since Gary Kubiak, I've had Gary Kubiak, Vance Joseph, Mike Mularkey, Mike Vrabel for a little bit, Adam Gase, and now Brian Flores. And I've only been covering the league. This is going to be, this is my 5th year. So 5 years I've covered 6 different head coaches. So I hope that stays the same. But as far as your tanking question, I always say this, it's a journalism kind of cliche, but you either want to cover, especially on a beat, you either want to cover a team that's really, really good so that they're the talk of the league, or they're bad enough that they still the talk of the league. And this team has found their way into conversation. People have been people want to see, you ever see a car wreck and you drive by it and you see people turning their neck, kind of bottlenecking, trying to see what's going on? That's what people do for bad seasons. And that's what people are doing for the Miami Dolphins season. They want to see what's going on, why are they tanking, how are the players interacting with it, who's getting traded next, all that different stuff. So it's kept me on my P's and Q's. One thing I will say, the players in the locker room, they've kept their spirits high, and that's one thing that I worried about. So I've never covered a true, losing season before. But they've kept their spirits high. And, I haven't seen, apathy hit the locker room yet. I haven't seen, not caring hit the locker yet, or that's apathy. Or not hear, anger hit the locker yet. Guys are just hey, Mr. Chocolate, how you doing? Guys are they're trying to work hard, and there are a lot of young guys. So I think that helps me on a day-to-day basis. I will say that it becomes difficult as the year goes on to continue to find different storylines, because you don't want to write this team is bad every week. But it forces you to be more creative, which I like. I'll give you guys a sneak preview. Next week, I'm going to have a story coming out about the Dolphins draft. And I've never written about the draft in October, but I'll give you guys a little hint. It's going to involve Tua. So I'm going to write a story about the Dolphins draft and their bounty of first-round picks. And that's something that, I've thought of on different ways to cover this team, because at some point you're not going to care about what's happening on Sunday. It's going to be, are they going winless? What are they going to do in 2020? How are players reacting? And those become the 3 biggest storylines, along with how Josh Rosen is developing. So you hit those points, and you know that, hey, people are going to care less about the development of, your right tackle. You're going to have to care about things that are long-standing and make an impact beyond this year. So I've kind of had to understand that, and it's kind of changed the way I've covered the team. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you guys, as always, for joining, and we'll be back here again next week for the same thing. Actually, it'll be more football related, so it won't quite be the same thing. So thanks, guys.